You know what, SWV? You still would have been a fucking Yankee coward. You still would have been a big pussy. And I don't mean big pussy from The Sopranos. I mean a legit big pussy. You would have still been the fucking Pussmaster General. But it wouldn't have been so goddamn bad. But for the fact that, you know, you've been going around YouTube for 15 plus years now talking about swinging folks around by their rat tail and caving folks' chests in and swelling folks' eyes shut. You're not going to do any of those things. You proved it on the Ave that you just ain't about that fucking life. Fucking pathetic. Absolutely fucking pathetic. Number 12.
His mansion. What their exact relationship is, I can't prove, but I'm going to conjecture, and I'm pretty sure, is because Dennis Wilson was a voracious user of drugs of all kinds, which everyone he knows can testify to. I'm pretty sure that the main attraction to having Charles Watson live with him, and where he takes a complete stranger into his house, was his drug connection. I also believe, based on things Manson has told me and other inferences, that they probably had some sort of sexual relationship as well. So it's important to consider that Dennis Wilson brought Charles Watson into knowing, he introduced him to Charles Manson. I don't think a lot of people realize that fact, and if they do, they don't see the significance of it. So the most important thing here is Charles Watson was an independent drug dealer, already a drug dealer, like Linda Kasabian, before he met Manson. From what I can see, he was operating on a more sophisticated network of drug dealers and involved with serious criminals long before he met Manson. And he was not the brainwashed follower that you've been led to believe. He also was not deeply enmeshed in the Manson commune as much as other people. He stayed with a girlfriend in Hollywood. He often left the commune at the Spahn Ranch and had his own independent criminal enterprises going on, which was mostly dealing marijuana, LSD, mescaline, cocaine, and he himself was taking speed, methadone, which is very important into the grotesque and violent nature of the crimes, because he was on speed the night he killed these people in such a vicious and repetitively destructive manner, which a lot of people have commented is typical of methadone murders, that they make you extremely overly violent, and repetitive stabbing is something that people on speed have often been noted to do in the commission of a crime. So Charles Watson was basically an independent drug dealer on the fringes of the Manson group, sometimes deeply involved, but more often off on his own with his own criminal enterprises. That's important to know about him. Also, he was very good friends with Terry Melcher, who lived in the Polanski house before Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski rented it. He already knew Terry Melcher very well. He already knew Dennis Wilson very well. And he had been to parties with Manson at the Cielo Drive house. Dennis Wilson also introduced Sharon Tate to Manson and Watson at some of these parties. And according to Manson, the first time he met Sharon Tate was at the home of Elvis Presley when Elvis was in Las Vegas. Some people who were a part of what was called the Memphis Mafia that Manson knew, Dennis Wilson knew them, and they would go to gambling parties held at Elvis's house. And that's where he first met Sharon Tate. So it's important to understand Tex Watson was deeply involved with the people that were murdered. He knew Frykowski as a fellow drug dealer. He knew J.C. He knew Sharon Tate. Wasn't a friend of hers, but was on nodding terms, seeing her at parties, knew of her lifestyle. So that's very important to know. He was not a impoverished hippie. He was a fairly well-dressed mod, retinue of the Hollywood party scene. And he was a pretty major drug dealer who was trying to work his way up in the drug dealing hierarchy when these murders occurred. And I believe, from having spoken to Manson about these crimes very often over many years, I don't even think Manson ever was fully aware of the activities of Charles Watson. I don't think he knew exactly what he was up to. Not all of it. And that's very important in why there are still mysteries that endure about these crimes.
Now let's go back to August 9th and 10th, 1969, the Tate LaBianca murders. Right. What happened? Who is most responsible for the murders? And maybe most importantly, why did they happen?
Well, I think one of the reasons why it's so hard to understand the complexity of this case is that crime that happened at Cielo Drive, the murder of Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Frykowski, Folger, and Parent, is given so much emphasis that you aren't really shown the full narrative that led to it, and how that crime then led to the crimes that occurred afterwards. I mean, for the most part, I think the average person who is not deeply involved in trying to understand this case or what actually happened has the idea that Manson sent his hippie followers out to murder people to start a race war that was supposedly called Helter Skelter, and that it didn't really matter who he killed as long as people were viciously murdered, and that would supposedly inspire blacks to rise against white people. And that, now, it doesn't make any sense. It never did make sense to me, even when I wrote Helter Skelter when it came out in 1974, the book by Vincent Bugliosi. That's what I mean, isn't that what you would say is what most people believe happened?
Yes, I would think so.
And furthermore, whatever people may believe, they believe Charles Manson is absolutely the supposed, and it's a ridiculous melodramatic word for this confused and actually failure of a crime. He's supposed to be the mastermind of these murders. To understand what happened that night, August 8th and 9th of 1969, you have to look at a series of other crimes that Watson committed before that, which are pretty much either omitted from the narrative or placed in the wrong context. If you don't mind, I think it's important as an introduction to get into that. First of all, on July 1st of 1969, Watson engaged in one of his usual criminal procedures, which was he was a drug dealer, but he would rob drug dealers and steal their supply because they're not going to call the police and say, hey, I was just robbed of my drugs. So this was his MO. That's basically what he did. He did it several times, and I get into a very important, even earlier attempt to rob a drug dealer that occurred in April of 1969, but that may be a little too complicated for what we need to get into. In July of 69, he tried this with a major drug dealer and criminal named Bernard Crowe, whose nickname was Lotsapapa. And Bernard Crowe, he basically said, I'm going to go get some marijuana for you. Crowe gave him some money to buy the drugs, and Watson left his own girlfriend, a woman named Rosina Kroner, with this drug dealer, Lotsapapa, or Bernard Crowe, and took off with the money and didn't bring the drugs back to him. Well, that would tell you something about the character of Charles Watson, that he would leave his own girlfriend as collateral with an armed drug dealer and some other thugs that were in the place. He did that, and this was July of 69. Bernard Crowe, through Rosina Kroner, got the number of the Spahn Ranch and called and asked for Charles. And there was one payphone at the ranch. The phone was given to Charles Manson rather than Charles Watson, because they were both Charlies. This guy, Bernard Crowe, who was kind of like a superfly black drug dealer type of the time, threatened to come and burn down the ranch and kill everyone there, something to that effect, to Manson, if you don't give me back my money now. You follow me so far? So Manson hears this threat, and he and T.J. Wallerman, a friend of his, he met on the Spahn Ranch, who was working there, but he was a Vietnam vet who had some experience with firearms. They both went to an apartment house in Hollywood on Franklin, and where this guy was, Bernard Crowe. And Manson brought a gun with him, and he basically tried to free Rosina Kroner, Tex Watson's girlfriend, from Bernard Crowe. In the process of that, and there's been many different descriptions of what exactly occurred, and T.J. Wallerman, who was there when it happened, told me his version of the story. Manson has told me his. There have been many accounts of exactly what happened. But basically, Manson, in the process of this visit to Bernard Crowe to try to get Rosina Kroner back from him, shot Bernard Crowe with the gun. He thought